Birthdays are supposed to mark new beginnings. A chance to celebrate life, love, and the people closest to you. On my 40th birthday, I expected nothing more than laughter around the dinner table, a toast from my husband, maybe a heartfelt card from my children. Instead, I was handed a gift bag that would split my life in two. My sister-in-law, Monica, walked toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The room quieted as she placed the bag in my hands. I pulled back the tissue paper, expecting perfume or jewelry, something simple, something thoughtful. But instead, I found a manila envelope. I opened it, and there it was, divorce papers, tucked inside with a sticky note that read, "From all of us." The air around me shifted. My husband, Daniel, didn't step in to defend me. He didn't even look embarrassed. He laughed, an ugly, satisfied laugh, and raised his phone to record the moment as though my humiliation were a performance meant for his entertainment. Around me, people whispered. Some looked down, pretending not to see. Others smirked. I felt every eye on me, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to collapse under the weight of betrayal laid out in black ink on crisp white paper. But here's the part no one in that room understood. I had been ready for this. Long before they ever thought they could use my birthday as a stage for my destruction. I had already set a plan in motion. They thought they were pulling the rug from under me, but I was the one who had been cutting the floor out from beneath them for months. My revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was quiet, steady, and inevitable. So I smiled. I thanked Monica. I signed the papers right then and there, slid them back into the envelope, and pushed it across the table. You could have heard a pin drop. Then I stood up, straightened my dress, and walked out. Every step I took that night was one step closer to the destruction of the people who had tried to destroy me. This is not just the story of a broken marriage. It's the story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a revenge so calculated that by the time they realized what had happened, it was already too late. Before I share how it all unfolded, I need you to do one thing. Hit like and subscribe. Honestly, sharing these stories isn't easy, and your support is what keeps me going. If you've ever been humiliated but refused to let it define you, show me with a like. That's how I know you understand. Now let me take you back to how it all began. When I look back, it almost feels like two separate lives. The one I thought I had, and the one I was actually living without realizing it. For over 15 years, I believed in the family Daniel and I built. We married young, full of dreams and promises, and for a long time I convinced myself we were happy. Together we had 2 children, Emily, who had just turned 13, and Ryan, who was 10. They were the center of my world. Everything I did, every sacrifice I made, every sleepless night and every early morning, it was all for them. We lived in a quiet suburb in Ohio, in a house that looked like it belonged on a postcard. White siding, blue shutters, a yard where the kids could run barefoot in the summer, and a porch swing that creaked just enough to feel lived in. From the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect American family. Neighbors waved when we pulled into the driveway, and from a distance, no one could have guessed that cracks were forming inside those walls. Financially, we were stable, or at least that's what everyone thought. Daniel had a decent job, one that gave us comfort but not extravagance. What no one knew was that I had been the quiet architect behind our financial security. I kept track of the accounts, paid the bills, managed the investments. Daniel had little interest in the details. And while he liked to boast that he was the provider, I was the one making sure the roof over our heads stayed secure. That control became my lifeline later, though I never imagined I'd need it in the way I eventually did. At first, the cracks in our marriage were so small I thought I was imagining them. Daniel began to pull away, not with grand gestures but in the small, cutting ways that leave scars no one else can see. His comments became sharp, hidden under the disguise of jokes. If I dressed up for dinner, he'd laugh and say, "Who are you trying to impress?" If I spoke up at family gatherings, he'd roll his eyes, dismiss me with a smirk, or cut me off mid-sentence. It was death by 1,000 little cuts. And the worst part was how subtle it all appeared to anyone else. But it wasn't just Daniel. His sister, Monica, played her role in reminding me that I didn't quite belong. She had a way of sliding in remarks that were disguised as playful teasing, but designed to hurt. She'd lean across the table at Sunday dinner and say things like, "You're lucky Daniel puts up with you. He could have done so much better." Everyone would laugh, as if it was a harmless joke, but her eyes told me she meant every word. I learned to smile through it, to take the blows in silence, because defending myself only made me look defensive, and somehow that always made me the problem. Family gatherings became an exercise in endurance. While others shared inside jokes and laughter, I often felt like the outsider in my own marriage. Monica treated Daniel as if he were still hers to manage, always reminding him of old stories from their childhood that I wasn't part of. always pointing out how much he resembled their late father, as if I was intruding on a bond one could never touch. I used to think I was imagining it, that I was being sensitive, but the longer I stayed silent, the clearer it became. Monica didn't just dislike me, she wanted me gone. As time passed, Daniel's distance became harder to ignore. He was suddenly protective of his phone, keeping it face down on the table, taking it with him everywhere, even into the bathroom. When I asked him about his long nights at work, his answers were short, clipped, dismissive. He brushed me off like I was nagging. I noticed the whispers with Monica in the kitchen during family get-togethers. They'd fall silent the moment I walked in, exchanging looks that told me more than words ever could. Late at night, when the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind. Was I imagining the tension, the secrecy, the lies that lingered in the air? Or was my marriage unraveling right before my eyes? I wanted to believe it was the former, because the latter would mean everything I had poured my life into was already crumbling, and I wasn't ready to face that. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The warmth I once felt in Daniel's touch was gone, replaced by cold indifference. The love I thought was unshakable had become something transactional, something fragile. And Monica's constant presence in our lives felt less like family support, and more like a shadow looming over everything I tried to hold together. I told myself that things would get better, that every marriage has its seasons, that maybe Daniel was just stressed with work. I told myself I was imagining the way his eyes lit up when he looked at his phone but stayed dull when he looked at me. I told myself it was nothing when he came home late smelling faintly of perfume I didn't wear. I told myself all of this because the alternative, that my husband was betraying me, that his sister was part of it, was a truth too heavy to carry just yet. Still the unease grew. It lingered in every unanswered question, every half-smile, every whisper I wasn't meant to hear. And though I didn't have proof, I knew in my gut that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. What I didn't know then was just how calculated, cruel, and humiliating their betrayal would become, and how the strength I didn't know I had would be the very thing that saved me. It started with a message I wasn't supposed to see. One evening, while Daniel was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. For years I had respected his privacy, never needing to scroll through his calls or texts, but something inside me, something sharp and urgent, pushed me to pick it up. What I found changed everything. There were photos, words that carried intimacy no wife should ever stumble across, promises whispered between two people who should never have been entangled. Her name was Samantha. She worked in his office, someone he had mentioned casually in passing, as though she were just another face in a crowd. But the texts told a different story. Pictures of them together at restaurants I thought he had gone to with clients. Messages about weekends away, excuses disguised as work trips. And words, those words, that made it clear he had given her the tenderness he once reserved for me. My stomach turned as I scrolled. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that this wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was an ongoing affair, woven carefully into his daily routine while I stood in the background, raising our children, believing we were still a team. The part that shattered me most wasn't even the cheating itself. It was what came after. The more I searched, the more I realized Monica knew. She had covered for him. Her texts were there too, laced with laughter, sharing inside jokes about me, telling him she had his back whenever he needed an alibi. My sister-in-law, who had shared my table, who had watched my children grow, had been the shield that allowed his lies to thrive. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I carried that knowledge in silence, like a weight pressing on my chest. Nights turned long and sleepless. I'd lie beside him while he snored, staring at the ceiling with tears streaming quietly down my face, wondering how long I had been living in a marriage that wasn't real. I cried in the shower so the kids wouldn't hear. I smiled at family dinners so no one would ask questions. I buried my heartbreak under layers of composure, but inside, I was unraveling. The cruelty didn't stop at the affair. One summer evening, we had a barbecue in our backyard. Neighbors came by, laughter filled the air. Children ran around with sparklers. For a moment it almost felt normal, until I stepped inside to grab more plates and heard voices drifting through the open kitchen window. Daniel's voice, low and smug. Monica's, sharp and gleeful. "She's too weak to leave," Daniel said. Monica laughed, that familiar, cutting laugh. "Exactly. She'll never go anywhere. Honestly, we should just get rid of her, make it official. It would be better for everyone." The words hit me harder than anything I had read on that phone. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was contempt. I stood frozen, holding those plates, every sound around me fading until their voices were all I could hear. In that moment, I realized they weren't just content with lying to me. They were mocking me, plotting against me, making me the punchline in my own home. I wanted to storm out, to scream, to expose them right there in front of everyone. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was survival. Or maybe it was the sudden clarity that if they were planning to destroy me, I couldn't afford to act on emotion. I needed something stronger. Something they wouldn't see coming. That night, as the laughter of the barbecue faded into the dark, I lay awake replaying their words over and over. I saw Monica's smirk, Daniel's cruel grin, and I made myself a promise. They would regret underestimating me. They thought I was weak. They thought I would break. They had no idea that in trying to strip me of my dignity, they had ignited a fire in me I didn't even know existed. So I began to plan. Quietly. Methodically. Every day while Daniel went to work, I pulled together documents, bank statements, investment records, property deeds. I knew every password, every account, every financial move he had made because I had always been the one keeping track. What he thought was control was actually neglect, and that neglect gave me access to everything I needed. I made copies, stored them away. I researched lawyers, consulted in whispers, careful not to leave traces. I discovered hidden accounts, places where he had siphoned money, thinking I'd never notice. I noticed. I recorded every transaction, every detail, building a case brick by brick. I wasn't just preparing to leave. I was preparing to take away the very ground he stood on. The nights were still long. The heartbreak didn't vanish. There were moments when I broke down, clutching a pillow to my chest, muffling my sobs so Emily and Ryan wouldn't wake. But every tear hardened into resolve. Every sleepless night became fuel for what I was building. And as I gathered my strength in silence, I looked at Monica differently too. Every insult she threw at me, every smirk, every joke at my expense, I stored them away like ammunition. She thought she had me cornered. She thought she was clever, orchestrating my downfall beside her brother. What she didn't realize was that I had already begun writing the ending of this story, and it wasn't going to be hers to tell. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Comment below, I read every single one. And don't just watch, silently subscribe. It takes you a second, but for me, it's a reminder I'm not alone in telling these painful truths. Remember waking up on the morning of my 40th birthday with a knot in my stomach. Most people dream of a milestone birthday being filled with joy, laughter, and love. For me, it felt like walking into a storm I couldn't quite see, but I could feel it coming. The air in the house was cold. Even though it was July, Daniel barely acknowledged me. A muttered happy birthday, under his breath, no hug, no warmth. The kids were sweet. Emily had drawn me a card, and Ryan gave me one of his favorite baseball cards wrapped in printer paper. Their innocence was the only light that day started with. Daniel had insisted we celebrate with dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. A big night, he called it. His tone felt off, like there was an inside joke I wasn't privy to. Still, I told myself maybe he was trying. Maybe, despite everything, he wanted this birthday to be special. I pushed my doubts aside and dressed in the new black dress I had saved for months to buy. I wanted to feel beautiful, even if no one else noticed. When we arrived, the restaurant was filled with familiar faces, family, friends, even a couple of Daniel's colleagues I barely knew. The atmosphere was festive, but the undercurrent was strange. Smiles too wide, whispers I couldn't catch, glances exchanged between Daniel and Monica. I sat down, trying to shake it off, trying to believe that I was overthinking. The dinner went smoothly at first, small talk, clinking glasses, polite laughter. But the unease never left. Monica was seated across from me, her eyes dancing with something I couldn't name, something that made me feel like prey being studied by a predator. Then it happened. As the waiter cleared the plates, Monica reached under the table and pulled out a glossy gift bag. "For the birthday girl," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. The table hushed. Everyone leaned in slightly, waiting. I reached inside. The tissue paper crinkled loudly in the silence. My fingers brushed against a heavy envelope. I pulled it out, confused, and as soon as I saw the thick stack of papers inside, my heart dropped. Divorce papers. Not wrapped with ribbon, not hidden behind a joke. Just there, raw and cruel. On top was a sticky note in Monica's handwriting. "From all of us." For a moment, time stopped. My ears rang, my throat went dry. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others stared with barely hidden fascination, as though this was the entertainment of the night. And then Daniel, my husband of 15 years, the father of my children, burst out laughing. He pulled out his phone, holding it up to record my reaction like I was part of some twisted comedy skit. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to scream. But I did neither. Instead, I felt something rise in me. Something stronger than pain, stronger than shame. It was clarity. I looked directly at Monica, who was smirking like she had won some grand battle. I looked at Daniel, grinning behind his phone. Then, without a word, I slid the papers out, found the line where my signature was meant to go, and calmly signed my name. The pen glided smoothly, as though my hand had been waiting for this moment. The sound in the room shifted, gasps, muffled whispers, the clinking of a dropped fork. I pushed the papers back into the bag, set it neatly on the table, and stood. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice steady in the thick silence. "This is the best gift you could have given me." I smoothed my dress, picked up my purse, and turned to walk out. Behind me, I heard chairs scraping, murmurs of disbelief, Monica's voice hissing something to Daniel. But I didn't look back. Every step I took out of that restaurant was a step away from the prison they thought they had built for me. Outside, the night air was cool against my face. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt light. Because what no one at that table knew, not Daniel, not Monica, not anyone, was that I had already set everything in motion. Long before they plotted this humiliation, I had been quietly working, preparing, and ensuring that when the fall came, it wouldn't be mine. They thought they had destroyed me. What they didn't realize was that I had already destroyed them. Would you have had the strength to smile and walk out like I did? If you're still here with me, then this story has touched you somehow. Don't just watch silently. Hit like, share this video, and subscribe. Because stories like mine aren't just stories. They're reminders that no matter how hard others try to break you, you can choose to rise. The night I walked out of that restaurant, I didn't walk out broken. I walked out free. What Daniel, Monica, and the others didn't know was that everything they thought they were taking from me, I had already protected months earlier. What they thought was my downfall was really the beginning of theirs. It started nearly a year before my 40th birthday. I had noticed Daniel's strange behavior. Late nights, unexplained withdrawals from our joint account. Sudden bursts of anger when I asked questions that any wife should be able to ask. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that stress from his job was making him cold. But then I found the receipts, hotel charges in cities he was supposedly traveling through for business. Jewelry bought but never given to me. And texts, dozens of them, that I stumbled upon when his phone buzzed one night while he was in the shower. They weren't just from Monica. There were others. Women whose names I didn't know. Women he showered with gifts while telling me we had to cut back. The betrayal nearly broke me then. But something inside me refused to collapse. Instead of screaming at him or throwing the phone in his face, I quietly began to prepare. If Daniel thought he was clever, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. A woman recommended to me by a colleague, sharp, relentless, and discreet. We met in a small office on the edge of town, where I told her everything. She listened without judgment, then leaned forward and said, "If you want to win, you have to play smarter than him. Don't confront him now. Gather everything. Protect yourself. Then when he thinks he's winning, you strike." So that's exactly what I did. I went through every document in the house, bank statements, tax returns, company records. I copied everything. And in those numbers, I found even more than I expected. Money funneled from his company accounts into personal ones, shady transfers that looked a lot like tax fraud, and debts I had never known existed. My hands trembled as I pieced it together, but my mind grew sharper with each discovery. He wasn't just betraying me, he was betraying his own children, risking their future with his recklessness. Quietly, I began moving what I could. The house had always been in both our names, but with the right legal maneuvers, I shifted it entirely into mine. The savings account I had built slowly over the years from side jobs and careful budgeting, I separated it and locked it under my name alone. The stocks we had invested in together, I transferred into a trust, making sure the children would always have something no matter what happened. Each move was deliberate, calculated, hidden. I knew Daniel's arrogance would blind him. He thought I was weak, that I would cry and cling to him no matter what he did. He never once imagined I could be the quiet storm gathering in the background. At the same time, I began documenting everything. Screenshots of messages, photos of receipts, records of his unexplained trips. Every piece of evidence went into a hidden folder, and then into the hands of my lawyer. When the time came, there would be no room for lies. And then there were the children. My biggest fear was losing them in the chaos. So I made sure every step I took was in their interest. Custody papers were quietly prepared long before Monica ever handed me that gift bag. My lawyer built a case so strong that when the divorce was triggered, there would be no doubt where the children belonged. By the time my 40th birthday arrived, I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking into the final act of a play I had been writing for months. So when Monica slid those papers across the table, thinking she was humiliating me, I almost wanted to laugh. They believed they were forcing me into a corner. They didn't realize they were unlocking the very door I had been waiting for. The next morning, the legal process roared to life. Daniel expected me to be scrambling, begging for scraps. Instead, he found his accounts frozen. The house he thought he would claim was untouchable. The savings he assumed he'd drain were gone. His face twisted with confusion and fury as reality settled in. He had been outplayed. But that was only the beginning. His company, where he strutted around like a king, soon discovered the financial irregularities I had quietly exposed. Documents, emails, and transfers all pointed to misuse of funds. He was called into a meeting he never returned from. By the end of that week, Daniel was jobless, disgraced, and under investigation. And Monica, sweet Monica, who had gloated across the table while handing me divorce papers, suddenly realized her safety net was gone. Daniel could no longer shower her with stolen gifts. He could barely keep himself afloat, and when the family saw the evidence I leaked, messages showing her role in covering up the affair, her smug words mocking me while I cared for the children, they turned on her. The same relatives who once praised her began whispering behind her back. Invitations stopped. Calls went unanswered. She was left exactly where she belonged, alone, exposed, and despised. As for the children, I sat them down gently one evening. I didn't rant. I didn't poison their minds. I simply told them the truth. I showed them enough to understand that their father had made choices that hurt us all. Emily cried silently, her little shoulders shaking as she asked, "Mom, why would Dad do that to us?" Ryan clenched his fists, anger burning in his young eyes. And then, without hesitation, they both said the same thing. "We want to stay with you." That night, I held them close, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. They chose me, not because I forced them, but because even in the storm I had protected them. I had never stopped being their anchor. Daniel tried to fight it, of course. He tried to twist the story to paint himself as the victim. But the evidence was undeniable. The courts saw it. The family saw it. The children felt it. He was left with nothing but his bitterness and the wreckage of his own making. And me? I didn't dance in victory. I didn't gloat or scream. My revenge was never about spectacle. It was about silence. It was about walking away with dignity, while they crumbled under the weight of their own cruelty. My strength wasn't in the battles I fought loudly. It was in the ones I won quietly in the shadows while they laughed at me, thinking I was powerless. In the end, I didn't just survive. I built a new life, one where my children knew the meaning of resilience. One where I could breathe without walking on eggshells. One where I finally remembered who I was. They thought betrayal would break me. They thought humiliation would bury me. But what they didn't know was that every wound they inflicted only sharpened my resolve. And when the time came, I didn't need to scream for revenge. My silence was loud enough. Have you ever been underestimated, only to rise stronger than anyone expected? If you felt that power in my story, don't keep it to yourself. Like, subscribe, and share this video. Because sometimes, the quietest victories are the ones that echo the loudest. Daniel's downfall wasn't sudden. It was like watching a tower he had built stone by stone slowly collapse under the weight of his own arrogance. Once the divorce papers were processed, and the courts froze his accounts, he lost access to the lifestyle he had flaunted for years. His coworkers whispered behind his back, and when his company dug into his financial missteps, it didn't take long before he was forced out. The man who once strutted through the door at midnight claiming to be closing deals, was now sitting in his sister's basement, unemployed, avoiding the eyes of neighbors who had heard the gossip. His affair with Samantha quickly unraveled. The expensive dinners, the surprise trips, the weekend hotel escapes, all of it had been funded by the money he siphoned from our marriage. Once that dried up, so did her affection. She walked away without hesitation, leaving him with nothing but shame and silence. I remember the day he tried to come back. He stood on my porch, shoulders hunched, a shadow of the man who had mocked me in front of family and friends. He begged, swore he had changed, claimed he wanted to be a better father. But I had already seen his true face. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply closed the door. That was my answer. Monica's fall was quieter, but no less brutal. The woman who had spent years cutting me down suddenly found herself without an audience. She had been so entangled in Daniel's finances that when his support collapsed, so did her security. Family gatherings that once felt like her stage now became minefields she couldn't walk through. Whispers followed her into every room. Friends she once boasted to stopped answering her calls. The same relatives who had laughed along with her cruelty now saw her as toxic, untrustworthy. The smug grin she wore when she handed me those divorce papers had disappeared, replaced with bitterness and loneliness. Her power had always come from piggybacking off others, and once that was gone, she was left standing alone. As for me, I rose. Not overnight, not without scars, but stronger than I ever thought possible. I poured my energy into my children, making sure Emily and Ryan knew they were safe, loved, and heard. I watched Emily's confidence return, her laughter no longer shadowed by the tension that once filled our home. Ryan, who had grown quiet during the chaos, began to speak freely again, sharing dreams of becoming an engineer, no longer afraid his father's harsh words would cut him down. I built my career with a focus sharper than ever before. Each success felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been buried under years of belittlement. I created a home filled with peace, not pretense, a place where my children and I could breathe freely. And most importantly, I rediscovered myself, the woman who had been strong enough to plan revenge quietly, patient enough to endure the storm, and brave enough to walk away with dignity intact. I used to think my life ended the night I signed those divorce papers at my birthday dinner. But in truth, that was the moment it began again. Daniel and Monica thought they had written my ending. Instead, I turned it into my beginning. And now, if you've stayed with me through every twist of this story, I want to ask you something. You've walked through the pain, the betrayal, and the triumph with me. Don't just click away and forget this moment. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this story. Because if you don't, it may fade from your mind tomorrow. But tonight, somewhere, there's another woman sitting in silence, wondering if she has the strength to rise. She needs to know she's not alone. They thought my 40th birthday would be my breaking point. They thought those divorce papers, handed to me like a cruel gift in front of smiling faces and mocking laughter, would destroy me. But what they didn't understand was that they had only given me the perfect stage to begin my silent revenge. That night, when the cameras were rolling and Daniel was grinning beside Monica, they believed they were writing my humiliation into history. What they didn't realize was that I had already written the ending, and it wasn't theirs to control. I look back now, and I realize how much power there is in silence. I never screamed when I found the texts between Daniel and Samantha. I never confronted Monica when I overheard her whispers about me being too weak to leave. I never gave them the satisfaction of seeing me shatter, though my nights were soaked in tears and my days carried the weight of betrayal. Instead, I watched. I listened. I gathered every piece of information, every careless mistake they made, and I stored it like ammunition. My silence was not weakness. It was preparation. Betrayal has a way of carving scars deep into your soul. It changes how you look at love, family, and loyalty. To be deceived by a spouse is one thing, but to have a sister-in-law, someone who smiled at my children and broke bread at my table, participate in that deception. It was a knife twisted slowly, deliberately. Yet the pain I endured became the very strength I leaned on. It taught me that I could survive heartbreak, survive humiliation, survive the storm, and still rise from the ashes. Sometimes I wonder what Daniel thinks now, sitting alone in his sister's basement, the laughter gone, the spotlight dimmed. Does he remember the way he once sneered at me across the table, telling Monica I was too fragile to stand on my own? Does Monica replay her own words about getting rid of me, now that she's the one everyone has abandoned? They believed they were orchestrating my end, but in truth, they orchestrated their own downfall. There is a lesson buried in my story, one I wish every woman could carry with her. Never underestimate a quiet, observant woman. We do not need to scream to be heard. We do not need to destroy in public to be powerful. Revenge, when done in silence, when carried out with patience and precision, is far more devastating than any outburst of rage. Because while anger fades, silence lingers. It seeps into the cracks of a guilty conscience, and echoes long after the laughter has died. I see now that resilience is not about pretending you're unbreakable. Resilience is about admitting you were broken, and still finding the courage to build yourself again. I was broken. My trust, my heart, my family. Everything I thought was safe crumbled. But I rebuilt piece by piece into something stronger, sharper, wiser. I became a woman who no longer depends on the validation of others, no longer tolerates disrespect, no longer bends herself to fit into someone else's narrative. And maybe that's the true victory in my story. Not Daniel's downfall, not Monica's isolation, but my own rebirth. I walked away with my dignity intact, my children by my side, and a future that belonged solely to me. I am no longer defined by betrayal. I am defined by what I did after it. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't ever mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes it is the calm before the storm. And when the storm finally comes, it washes away everything that was built on lies, leaving only the truth standing tall. They tried to bury me under shame, but they forgot. I was a seed. And seeds, when pressed into the dark, only grow stronger roots. They laughed as I signed those papers. I can still hear the echo of their voices, the sound of Daniel's chuckle blending with Monica's smug whisper, as if they had already won. That moment was supposed to be my undoing. The scene they would revisit for years whenever they wanted to feel powerful. But now, years later, it is me who laughs, quietly, deeply, without bitterness. Because everything they tried to take from me became the foundation of what I rebuilt. And everything they mocked me for became the very proof that I was stronger than all of them combined. They wanted me to be humiliated, but instead they wrote the prologue of my triumph. They wanted me to break, but instead I bloomed. Looking back, I realized that survival isn't just about breathing through the storm. Survival is about choosing not to let the storm define you. They stripped me of love, of trust, of security, and for a while, it felt like they had stripped me of myself. But I reclaimed every piece, one step at a time. I turned betrayal into clarity. I turned heartbreak into resolve. I turned silence into strategy. And when the time came, I didn't need to scream for justice. I simply let the truth unravel on its own. And it destroyed them far more completely than I ever could have with rage. There's a kind of dignity in knowing that you never had to lower yourself to their level. Daniel lost his job, his wealth, and the respect of his own children. Monica lost her reputation, her comfort, and the false confidence she built on my pain. They are left in ruins, living in the shadow of their choices. And me? I walk in the light of mine. My dignity is intact, my children stand by my side, and my future belongs to no one but me. That is my victory. This was never just the story of a divorce. It was never only about a cheating husband or a conniving sister-in-law. This was about a woman who was underestimated, who was pushed to the edge, and who chose not to fall but to rise. This was about rebirth, about finding power in the quiet, finding strength in the broken places, and finding freedom in letting go of what was never truly love. So, remember my words. They laughed when I signed those papers. But I'm the one laughing now, not out of cruelty, but out of liberation. Because in the end, I didn't just survive them. I outlived the version of me they thought would never rise again. And that, more than anything else, is my triumph. This was not just the story of my divorce. This was the story of my rebirth. If this story touched you, don't leave without subscribing. Share it with a friend who needs to be reminded of their worth. And please, like this video, because every like tells me to keep bringing you stories of strength, betrayal, and survival.